There is a long recognised history of the influence and inclusion of theatre in live popular music performance. The level of infiltration varies between artists and between subgenres of the composite popular music sphere, but include the deliberate theatrics of metal acts such as Alice Cooper, Kiss and Marilyn Manson, the use of alternative performance identities, varying in degrees of physical complexity and variance from the unmistakably observable personae of David Bowie and Lady Gaga, to the unpretentious physicality of Nina Simone, where part of the drama of her later years was watching the mask slip and the true wounded diva emerge, raging at the audience. The aspect of pivotal importance to each of these examples, and many more besides, is the personification of the performing musician, which has the potential to have significant implications on how the music is perceived by both the performing musicians and the viewing audience. Within traditional musicology, the focus of what is being performed is often directed to the musical work, and this emphasis on text and theory hampers thinking about music as a performance art, because the discipline is inclined to be worshipful of the musical work and disdainful of performance. Nicholas Cook describes that the verb to perform means that you perform something, you give a performance of something. Philip Auslander posits that by considering music performance through the ontological lens of performance studies and not the more conventional musicological norm, what is being performed stretches beyond the confines of the musical work. Auslander suggests that it does not necessarily follow that simply because the verb to perform demands a direct object, that the object of performance must be a text, such as choreography, a dramatic script, or a musical work. In short, the direct object of the verb to perform need not be something. It can also be someone, an identity, rather than a text. Alejandro Madrid explains that performance studies is founded on the idea of performativity, and that the concept, as understood by music and performance scholars, provides an emphasis on understanding what music does or allows people to do, rather than asking what music is through the analysis of the text or performance. This can be demonstrated through the physical presentation of the artist, which includes the artist's persona, competence, approach, and style while performing. And personal identity should be considered to be as much of a performative construct as the musical work, because it is something which can be performed. Auslander is unabashedly performer-centric, applying this position principally to popular musicology, in the same way that Christopher Small and Stan Godlovich did with classical music via their respective musicking and personalism models. By considering identity as a performative construct, it is correct to present that what musicians perform first and foremost is not music, but their own identities as musicians, their musical personae. Auslander's work on persona has been pivotal in describing the performance presentation of musicians in the popular music sphere. Identifying that there are three layers to the physical presentation of a performing popular musician, Auslander terms these the real person, the performance persona, and the character. The first is reference to the actual person, the real personality, and their characteristics. The performance persona is a public performance image that the consuming public associate with that individual. The final category, the character, is considered to be the character depicted through the lyrical narrative of the song. These categories can be formed through the types of event schema which one develops for themselves as a performer. Event schemata are complex cognitive structures that act as a form of script for activities in given situations and with a given goal. These schemata are based on the behaviour we exhibit in specific situations, and which are established from previous experiences of events we perceive to be similar. The concept of Auslander's performance persona can be considered in different ways, but using similar concepts. Firstly, performance persona may be seen principally in terms of the type of musician one is, and a performance style is considered in regard to how you have learnt to play your chosen instrument. For example, the performance persona of Jimi Hendrix is mainly remembered for the distinctive way in which he played the guitar. His mannerisms will have been built on event schema regarding this performance style, and also the kind of goals he may have had in mind about the type of player he wanted to project. This complex interaction between the different types of event schema one learns helps to define oneself as a musician. Similarly, performance persona can be based on personality, which, through activity, shows the kind of character goals one has. This is built on event schema because of the goals regarding the type of character one is inhabiting. Rather than considering musical persona as completely constructed, Auslander suggests considering persona as a presentation of the self. Understanding that the performance persona of a delivering musician does not have to be a completely artificial creation and adaptation is important, especially with regards to pedagogy and the teaching of music performance, as we shall see a bit later. Auslander believes that musicians usually appear as themselves playing music, and if musical persona is considered to be an extension of the self and not necessarily a fully artificial concept and creation, we should take into account Goffman's 1959 sociological adaptation of dramaturgy. Life is a dramatically enacted thing, said Goffman, and at the heart of dramaturgical theory is that human behaviour is observed and analysed through its context rather than by examining its causes. Like all presentations of self, musical persona is situated. It is the performance of a specific social role for a particular audience in a defined context. At the heart of Goffman's theory is that we do not possess a single persona, but rather that we have multiple personae that we adopt in various different situations and circumstances. Therefore, one of the main ways in which one may determine context is not just based on their surroundings, but also on the way that other people are behaving in those particular surroundings, both of which will determine one's own behaviour. From a musical perspective, working within different types of ensemble will result in different behaviour depending on the personalities and behaviour of the other members and on the genre of the music being performed. Auslander also notes, in line with suggestions posed by Franco Fabbri, that each genre carries with it expectations as to what musicians and audiences will look like and how they will behave and interact. For musicians to understand how to construct a performance persona, an insight needs to be obtained regarding the specific event schemata which one might choose to develop for themselves as a performer. This can be initiated with an understanding of what kind of musician you are, and considering your performance style in regard to how you have learned to play your chosen instrument, much like the Jimi Hendrix example. This might be a simple idea, but is one which is largely overlooked by students focusing on developing technical prowess, sometimes over and above the artistic and physical delivery. In understanding the schemata needed for a performance style, it is imperative that a performer understands what kind of performance they want to present and the role that they want their audience to have in this delivery. My PhD research was centred on the role of gesture and non-verbal communication in popular music performance and how these skills could be applied to and taught in HE curriculum and pedagogy. The teaching of expressive performance and communication skills seems to face similar obstacles which can be found in the teaching and delivery of other subjective, qualitative areas of music performance, including perhaps improvising and arranging, all of which belong under the overarching idea of creativity and require the generation of independent and innovative ideas which represent originality, flair, and imagination. Educators need to have a solution for teaching an area such as expressivity, which is so often regarded as having what Anthony Gritton calls a black box approach, which denotes that you can either do it or you cannot. Pedagogically, this type of black box approach does not make for good practice. A 21st century learning environment for popular music performance means that areas such as learning about and delivering performance are not only educational imperatives, but commercial ones too. It is the responsibility of educators to ensure that students are as equipped as they can be as they make their way into the working world upon graduation. The area of persona sits at the helm of a newly designed framework through which I identified types of gesture and non-verbal communication which can be presented by a performer and provides a consolidated outline of the link between persona, gesture, and interaction, and the different elements which trigger given physical responses from the performer. It is also vital that students are able to engage critically and to foster a level of engagement with the respective theoretical underpinnings. The gestural framework can be used to get students to engage with developing an understanding of their own performance practice. Learning through doing is at the heart of experiential learning. But the suitability for a university-based higher music education is the connection and engagement with critical theory. This differs from traditional conservatoire education, with the focus pinned on people coming together to make or do something. Improving performance practice was a key objective of my research, but it is vital that this is achieved through the use of critical discourse and dialogue. Understanding how and why they are performing will ensure that students are thoroughly prepared for a working life in the professional world, and is a feature that stands university education perhaps ahead of their conservatoire competitors. This is something that we feel very strongly about at UWL, and all final year popular music performance students have a module which is focused on the practice of their performance, so they understand why they are doing what they do, providing them with the requisite theoretical underpinning for them to be able to make their own creative choices, which are substantiated through understanding, not solely on intuition. Understanding why they do what they do, and using theory to inform their practical decisions has proved vital to their understanding of their art form. Formal, informal, and non-formal learning environments each have different contributions which can be made to creating a learning environment which encourages and advocates the exploration of one's own craft and artistry. Integrating the attributes from informal learning, which are pivotal to a popular musician's educational trajectory, into a formal learning environment is what Gareth Dillon Smith terms as hybridized learning. Perhaps the main area of concern is not regarding the subject itself, but how the subject is taught, and that educators may need to rethink the way they teach because of the way that students learn. In a 21st century learning environment, it is important to remember that learning cannot be conceived simply as transmitting or receiving factual knowledge. Rather, it must be viewed as a process that involves becoming a different person with respect to possibilities for interacting with other people and the environment. As a learning theory, constructivism has taken on a progressively more significant role in the area of music education over the last 20 years. Joseph Shively cites Peter Webster's pivotal review of music education and constructivism when he explains that there is no one singular concept regarding constructivist teaching and learning, but there are a number of principles which resonate through the plethora of scholarly material written on the subject. Central to these ideas is the active role of the learner in his or her learning experiences. Therefore, in contrast to behaviourist principles, where the teacher is the sole communicator of new knowledge, the student is actively encouraged to contribute to the formation and delivery of new information in the classroom. This contribution can be made in a variety of ways, and this may be via the use and integration of tacit knowledge into the learning environment. Tacit knowledge can play an important role in teaching and learning. Brock describes that in a learning environment, both the expert, the teacher, and the novice, the student, arrive with their own forms of tacit knowledge. The tacit knowledge of an expert means that they know more than they can say in words, and helps the expert to answer questions intuitively and quickly. Brock believes that students should be made aware of the importance and existence of tacit knowledge and tacit processing, stating that we need to tell students that often the first thought they have is not necessarily the best thought, that they should engage rational thinking after that. They should be aware that they have explicit and implicit ideas about a problem, and learn to understand the interplay between those. Crucially, he goes on to say that if you think that learning the facts is going to make you really good at something, you're going to be disappointed and frustrated. By helping students to realise that they have both implicit and explicit choices available to them, they can be guided to choose between them as appropriate. With constructivist theories as a whole, the nature of the learning environment is one of experimentation and dialogue, where knowledge is seen within the context of problems to be discussed and solved. New meaning is constructed from knowledge which has already been acquired, and which has been gained from the previous experiences of the individual learners. In an area as subjective as persona and its related expressivity, each student will deliver different expressions based on their personalities and their own personal experiences. This sharing of experience and the creation of a dialogue and a safe learning environment between student and teacher is vital, a view shared by Condon, who states that teaching expressivity requires the teacher to create and foster an environment conducive to risk-taking and creative exploration. When the philosophical concepts of constructivism are applied to social settings, the paradigm becomes social constructivism, where the epistemological beliefs are that learning is undertaken and knowledge is obtained through collaboration with others. The collaboration could take place in a variety of setups, including teacher to student, student to student, or teacher to teacher. But social interaction is a primary method by which new meaning is created, and thus alters the role of the teacher to that of a facilitator, which, by default, adds to a view of the music learner as a collaborator in the learning process. This does not mean that the role of the teacher is redundant in social constructivism learning, but instead it redirects teacher activity towards the provision of a safe environment in which student knowledge construction and social mediation are paramount, says Adams. It is important that teachers are aware that rather than stepping away from the students, they should be working alongside them, providing carefully planned lessons, developing an understanding about when to enter and leave the learning process, and providing an academic framework for students to work with and to which they can contribute. Shively acknowledges that there is no formula for this, unfortunately, though accepting this ambiguity reflects a teaching stance in which the possibilities for learning and teaching are varied. One of the great challenges with constructivist teaching is that there needs to be a delicate balance between the teacher as an authority figure and the teacher as facilitator. And there are certain to be times when teacher-directed expertise and knowledge is required. The constructivist teacher should appropriately gauge when this might be. If we alter the role of the teacher to become a facilitator and put an emphasis on learning through social interaction, they can interact with the content of the class and with each other in a way that they find the most meaningful. Isbell writes that this approach necessitates more flexibility on the part of the teacher and a willingness to let student attention and performance dictate the direction and outcomes of the lesson. Although a detailed pedagogic explanation has to remain out of the limited confines of this paper, here is a summary of the changes we have made in order to continue to develop the artistic delivery of our popular music performance students. Changing the learning environment. Using a hybridized learning context, which constitutes an amalgam of concepts from formal, non-formal, and informal learning frameworks, all of which are necessary in order to meet the foci of the curriculum and real-world requirements. This, alongside the use of a social constructivist paradigm, ensures that knowledge is obtained in collaboration with others in a real-world learning environment. Meaning is then formed from this obtained knowledge. The class structure should be group-based in order to meet the emphasis on learning in collaboration with others, and the role of the teacher changes to that of a facilitator. Students are actively involved in the learning process, with their experiences forming valuable contributions to the classroom. The teacher as facilitator is responsible for creating a safe, comfortable learning environment where the students feel able to take risks and achieve success through creative and expressive individuality. Using a variety of suitable teaching techniques, this might include, for example, case study observation of selected musicians. Taking inspiration from established musicians increases musical awareness, but the educator should be conscious of making sure that the balance between imitation and inspiration is managed. Learning by doing. Students learn about expressivity in ensembles by being part of musical ensembles. Any problems which occur in this learning environment are identical to the ones which will occur in a real-life working environment. Peer feedback is vital. This is undertaken in conjunction with the teacher facilitator and allows the students to have ample opportunities to interact with fellow students and their teacher. It allows for greater student involvement in the learning process and gives the students the opportunity to learn from each other, as well as from the designated teacher. Self-assessment. Students should appraise their performances before and after watching themselves via a video recall process. This allows the students to reflect on their own performances and engage with critical thinking and analysis by comparing their perceptions of the performance with the reality of the given performance. Assessments should be both formative and summative, amalgamating a given musical performance in an authentic gig environment, reflection, personal analysis, and peer feedback. The student should have a clear awareness of the real-life learning goals and be aware of how they are progressing towards those goals. Integrating the teaching of expressivity into a curriculum at higher education involves a radical rethink on behalf of both educators and students. Shifting the emphasis of learning away from being the sole responsibility of the educator and moving to a collaborative relationship between students and teacher involves a level of trust and support between these two parties. The teacher as facilitator is responsible for creating an environment where the student feels comfortable to make mistakes, to understand how their bodies move and respond to music, and to forge working relationships with bandmates which are dependent on trust and an appropriate balance of leaders and followers, which significantly contributes towards creating and maintaining a 21st century learning environment.